Breaking news. The walls of the White House are shaking tonight as explosive allegations emerge against President Donald Trump. Multiple insiders now claim that behind the public bravado and political rallies lies a dark, violent truth. Trump has subjected his family to years of domestic abuse. The revelations, long whispered in the shadows, are now spilling into the open, threatening not just his presidency, but the moral fabric of the nation. According to former staffers, Secret Service members, and individuals once close to the First Family, what the public saw as Trump's fiery personality on stage was only a fraction of the rage that ruled his private life. Behind closed doors, sources describe shouting matches that rattled the walls, demeaning insults hurled at his wife, and humiliations aimed even at his children. One former aide confessed, "People think the stage is an act. It's not. That temper follows him home. And when the cameras are off, the cruelty is worse." The accounts are damning. They portray a household built not on affection, but on fear, where silence was safer than speaking, and every misstep risked an explosion. Staff recall moments when the First Lady appeared shaken, her expression guarded, as if masking something deeper. Family members, they say, walked on eggshells, aware that the smallest challenge to Trump's authority could ignite his fury. The nation is stunned. If true, these revelations mean that the President of the United States, the man tasked with protecting the people, could not even protect his own family from violence. Into this storm stepped Jasmine Crockett. Her words landed like a thunderclap. Donald Trump may shout about making America great, but greatness does not come from fear. Power does not come from intimidation. And if the president's own family has been living under abuse, then this is not just a private matter. It is a public betrayal of the highest order. For millions watching, the scandal is not political theater. It is a horrifying question. If the president cannot lead with compassion in his own home, what does that say about his leadership of a nation? The allegations that first sounded like whispers have now erupted into vivid testimony. Former White House staffers, once bound by silence, are coming forward with harrowing accounts of what life behind closed doors was really like. Their stories paint a picture of a household not filled with power and prestige, but with shouting, humiliation, and intimidation. One former aide described late evenings in the residence when Trump's booming voice could be heard echoing through the corridors. It wasn't political banter, it was rage, the aide recalled. The kind of rage that makes people freeze, the kind of rage you never forget. Another staffer recounted how the First Lady would emerge from private quarters, pale and tight-lipped, brushing off questions about her well-being with the same phrase, "I'm fine. Everything's fine." But her eyes, they said, told a very different story. Even Secret Service agents, men and women trained to observe without interfering, admitted that the tension inside the residence was palpable. One former agent, speaking under condition of anonymity, said, "We're trained to protect from outside threats, but the real threat seemed to come from within." The air inside those walls was heavy with fear. Household staff provided chilling details, plates slammed on tables, doors kicked shut, and insults hurled with venomous precision. One cleaner recalled overhearing Trump sneer, "You're nothing without me. Remember that." Another described seeing a family member flinch at his raised hand. Not a blow, but a gesture that carried the memory of many before it. The stories resonated with millions of Americans who had endured similar homes filled with unspoken violence. Call-in shows were flooded with survivors sharing their own pasts. "I recognize that silence," one woman said on live television. "I wore it for years, and seeing it in the eyes of the First Family, breaks my heart. Jasmine Crockett wasted no time in addressing these accounts. Standing at a press conference, she declared, "This is not rumor. This is testimony. These are not bitter words from enemies. They are confessions from those who saw and heard the truth firsthand. And the truth is simple. A man who rules his home with fear cannot lead this nation with integrity." Her words cut through the noise like a blade. The scandal was no longer just about whispers of abuse. It was about a pattern, a system, a way of life inside the White House that mirrored the darkest realities of countless American households. The nation's response was immediate and explosive. For years, critics had accused Donald Trump of arrogance, cruelty, and disrespect in the political arena. But now, with allegations of domestic abuse reverberating through every news outlet, the scandal struck a far deeper chord. This was not about policy or partisanship. This was about morality, about the safety of those closest to the most powerful man in America. Across the country, vigils and demonstrations erupted. In New York, crowds held signs that read "No excuse for abuse" and "If his family isn't safe, who is?" In Los Angeles, survivors of domestic violence lit candles outside City Hall, chanting "We believe" and "Justice at home, justice for all." On social media, hashtags surged to the top of trending lists. Number "No More Silence," number "Abuse is Abuse," and number "Stand with Survivors." For many Americans, the story struck painfully close to home. Callers on talk radio broke down in tears as they described recognizing the same haunted expressions in their own lives. One elderly woman said, "I lived under a man like that for 30 years. I see it in Melania's eyes. I see it in the way his children carry themselves. I believe every word." Jasmine Crockett became the unexpected voice of the movement. Appearing on national television, she delivered a simple but devastating line. If the president cannot treat his own family with dignity, how can he treat the American people with respect? Clips of her statement went viral, replayed millions of times, praised for cutting through the fog of political spin with brutal clarity. But Donald Trump responded with characteristic fury. At a rally in Pennsylvania, he pounded the podium, his face flushed, his voice booming. "Lies, fake news, a disgusting witch hunt. My family loves me, and I love them. Jasmine Crockett is nothing but a clown desperate for attention. She'll say anything, to attack me." The performance only deepened the divide. Supporters cheered wildly, but undecided voters watched uneasily. Split-screen broadcasts, showing Trump's red-faced denials beside footage of candlelit vigils, created a devastating contrast. Rage versus compassion, denial versus solidarity. The scandal was no longer containable. For millions of Americans, the question was no longer, "Is it true?" but rather, "What does it say about us as a nation if it is?" The storm deepened as fresh evidence poured in, pushing the scandal into territory that even Trump's fiercest loyalists struggled to ignore. What had begun as whispers now solidified into patterns, documented accounts, corroborated testimonies, and chilling details that no amount of shouting could erase. Former White House staffers, emboldened by the growing movement, began testifying under oath. One longtime aide described how the president's temper often exploded during private dinners where insults turned into threats and silence was enforced like law. "We all knew," the aide confessed, "but nobody dared to speak. To cross him was to end your career. For his family, it was worse. They couldn't walk away." Leaked logs from the Secret Service revealed curious patterns, frequent late-night noise disturbances reported by agents on duty, followed by orders to mark them as resolved internally. These logs, now verified by oversight committees, painted a disturbing picture of repeated incidents swept under the rug. a former household employee came forward with even darker testimony. She described cleaning up shattered glass after one explosive argument, saying Melania had whispered to her, "Don't ask questions. Just leave it." Another remembered a moment when a family member recoiled as Trump raised his hand, not in jest, not in politics, but in pure intimidation. The evidence was damning, and the public reaction was visceral. Editorial boards that once defended Trump now demanded answers. The Washington Post headline was stark: "Patterns of abuse inside the White House." Networks ran montages of Trump's public tirades side by side with testimonies describing private ones, the similarity undeniable. Trump's response was predictable but unconvincing. At yet another rally, he thundered, "They're inventing stories, inventing lies, dragging my family through the mud. These people hate me, they hate America, and they will do anything to destroy us." But his words sounded tired, even desperate. For every denial, there was a witness. For every insult hurled at Jasmine Crockett, another survivor stood up and said, "I believe her." And Jasmine, sensing the shift in public mood, sharpened her attack. At a press conference, she held up copies of the Secret Service logs and declared, "These are not rumors. These are not political attacks. These are official records showing disturbances silenced by power. When the President of the United States treats his home like a battlefield, his family like enemies, and his silence as a shield, he betrays not just them, he betrays this nation." Her words spread like wildfire, echoed on every channel, shared in millions of posts. The narrative had turned. This was no longer a question of a partisan politics. It was a moral crisis. And for the first time, cracks began to appear in Trump's wall of loyal defenders. The scandal reached a boiling point when the so-called smoking gun surfaced. Investigators obtained a series of internal White House communications, emails, and handwritten notes detailing efforts to cover up disturbances inside the residence. One particularly damning email, written by a senior staffer, read, "Noise complaints logged again last night. Family shaken. POTUS insists logs be cleared. Handle quietly." The message was time-stamped and verified, leaving little room for denial. Even more explosive were fragments from private journals kept by a former household staffer. In one entry, she described being summoned after a violent outburst. Broken dishes everywhere. First Lady pale, shaken. President furious. Ordered everyone out. She whispered, "Please, don't say anything." Then came the bombshell leak, an audio recording from within the residence, captured inadvertently by a communication system. Though muffled, Trump's voice was unmistakable. Raised, harsh, filled with rage. The words were damning. "You think you can embarrass me? You're nothing without me," followed by a sharp crash. Experts authenticated the recording within hours. The country listened in stunned silence. Trump lashed out immediately, claiming the tape was doctored garbage, a product of what he called the radical left's witch hunt. But sound engineers, forensic experts, and independent journalists all confirmed its legitimacy. The louder Trump protested, the more guilty he appeared. The public reaction was seismic. Crowds outside the White House replayed the recording on speakers during protests, chanting in unison, "We heard it. We believe it." On television, survivors of domestic abuse wept openly as they listened, saying the tone, the words, the silence afterward. It was all too familiar. Jasmine Crockett seized the moment. Standing before Congress with the transcript of the recording in her hand, she declared, "This is not rumor. This is not speculation. This is the president's own voice, echoing with rage, intimidation, and violence. If this is how he treats his family, how can he be trusted to lead our nation with honor? A house built on fear cannot guide a country built on freedom. The release of the audio recording ignited a firestorm that swept across the nation. What had once been whispered speculation was now undeniable evidence, the president's own voice, dripping with rage, echoing through the airwaves. Protests erupted in every major city, from Washington to Chicago, Los Angeles to Miami. Tens of thousands filled the streets carrying placards with Trump's damning words printed in bold, "You're nothing without me." Outside the White House, the crowd swelled into the tens of thousands. Protesters played the recording on loudspeakers, forcing the president's words back through the iron gates. Each time the line, "You're nothing without me," rang out, the crowd responded in unison. "We are everything without you." Pennsylvania Avenue became a sea of purple ribbons and candles, a living monument to resistance against silence and abuse. In Congress, the pressure became unbearable. Lawmakers were bombarded with calls from constituents demanding accountability. Editorial boards across the country thundered with op-eds declaring that America could not be led by a man exposed as violent behind closed doors. One headline in the Boston Globe read simply, "Unfit to lead." Even Trump's allies began to falter. A prominent senator, once a staunch defender, released a carefully worded statement calling the allegations deeply troubling. Another longtime supporter quietly distanced himself, telling reporters, "If these tapes are real, and experts say they are, then this is bigger than politics. This is about basic decency." The president, furious, lashed out with increasing desperation. At a rally in Texas, he screamed into the microphone, "This is a hoax! The tape is fake, the protests are fake, and Jasmine Crockett is the biggest liar in Washington." But his words fell flat. The images of candlelit vigils, the sound of his own recorded rage, and the visible cracks in his support base drowned out the bluster. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, rose as the moral center of the storm. Addressing a joint rally of survivors in New York, she spoke over the playback of the tape. "Listen to his words. That is not strength. That is not leadership. That is abuse. And if the President of the United States cannot treat his family with dignity, then he has forfeited the right to lead this nation." The crowd erupted, chants of "Step down" echoing across Manhattan. The scandal was no longer confined to the headlines. It had become a movement, one that demanded change, accountability, and justice at the highest level. For the first time in his presidency, Donald Trump looked not invincible, but cornered. The air in Washington felt electric as Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the podium, the dome of the Capitol glowing behind her, and tens of thousands of protesters stretching out across the National Mall. For days, America had been consumed by the scandal, the tape, the testimonies, the fury inside the White House. Now, the nation waited for someone to give voice to its outrage. Jasmine did not hesitate. Her voice was steady, sharp, undeniable. "We have heard the tape. We have read the testimonies. We have seen the fear written in the faces of those closest to the President of the United States. And tonight, America must face a truth too long ignored. A man who rules his family with violence cannot rule this nation with honor." The crowd roared, but she raised her hand for silence. This is not about politics. This is not about parties. This is about dignity, about decency, about the kind of country we want to be. If the president's own home is filled with rage and intimidation, what does that mean for every home across America where silence still hides abuse? Gasps and shouts of support echoed as she leaned forward, her tone unflinching. Donald Trump told his family, "You are nothing without me." Well, tonight America answers back. We are everything without you. We are a nation of survivors, a nation of truth seekers, a nation that will not be silenced by fear, not in our homes, not in our White House, not ever again. Tears streamed down faces in the crowd as the words reverberated. Vigils across the country joined in through live streams, candles lifted high, hashtags, or "Step Down Trump" and "No More Abuse" flooded social media within minutes. The collective voice of a nation refusing to tolerate silence any longer. Jasmine's final words landed like thunder. This is not rumor. This is not spin. This is reality. And reality demands justice. If you believe in truth, stand with me. If you believe in dignity, stand with me. And if you believe no leader, no father, no husband, no president is above accountability, then raise your voice tonight. Because together, we will end the silence. Together, we will reclaim America's honor. The crowd erupted in chants of "Justice! Justice! Justice!" as fireworks lit the night sky. The image of Jasmine Crockett, standing tall against the storm, became the defining symbol of a nation ready to turn the page. For Donald Trump, the scandal marked not just a political crisis, but a moral reckoning. For Jasmine, it marked her rise as the voice of justice in a country hungry for truth. And for America, it was a reminder that even in the highest house in the land, abuse can no longer be hidden.